Two main groups who opposed the Tsardom can be identified in Nicholas II's reign. They were revolutionaries and reformers. Reformers were strong critics of the Tsarist system who believed it could be changed for the better by pressure from without and reform from within. And then there were revolutionaries who believed that there should be a violent overthrow of the system. Within each of these groups, there were subdivisions. The opposition never formed a single coherent movement and rarely acted in unison. The revolutionaries comprised three major forces: the Populists, the Social Revolutionaries, and the Social Democrats. They all believed that Russia could not progress unless the Tsarist system was destroyed through revolution. This group regarded the future of Russia as being in the hands of the peasants, who had made up the overwhelming mass of the population. The peasants must take the lead in transforming Russia, beginning with the overthrow of the Tsarist system itself. As a revolutionary movement, populism dated from the 1870s. As with all significant political movements that came into being in this period, the populist leaders were drawn not from the peasants, but from the middle and upper classes. These leaders regarded it as their duty to educate the uninformed peasantry into an awareness of its revolutionary role. This involved going to the people, a policy by which the educated populace went from the universities into the countryside to live for a period with the peasants in an attempt to turn them into revolutionaries. This policy was seldom a success. The peasants tended to regard the students as airy-fairy thinkers and prattlers who had no knowledge of real life. In desperation, some populists turned to terrorism as the only way of achieving their aims. In 1879, a group calling itself the People's Will was founded with the declared intention of murdering members of the ruling class. This group, which was reckoned to be no more than 400 strong, gained notoriety 2 years later when it successfully planned the assassination of Alexander II, who was blown to pieces by a bomb. However, this act weakened rather than strengthened the populist movement. The murder of a czar who had initiated many reforms seemed to discredit the idea of reform itself, and so justified the repression imposed in the wake of the assassination. The importance of populism lay in its methods rather than its ideas. Its concept of a peasant-based revolution was unrealistic. The Russian peasantry were simply not interested in political revolution. What was lasting about populism was the part it played in establishing a violent anti-Tsarist revolution. All revolutionaries in Russia after 1870 were influenced, if not inspired, by the example of the populist challenge to the Tsardom. The Social Revolutionary Party, or SR, grew directly out of the populist movement. The economic spurt of the 1890s had produced a quickening of interest in political and social issues. Seeing this as an opportunity to gain recruits from the rapidly growing urban workforce, the populists began to agitate among the workers. The intention was to widen the concept of the people so that it encompassed not simply the peasants but all those in society who had reasons for wishing to see the end of Tsardom. An important figure in reshaping populist strategy was Viktor Chernov, who played a key part in the formation of the Social Revolutionary Party in 1901 and became its leader. He was a member of the intelligent class and sought to provide a firmer base for populism than its previous passionate but vague ideas had produced. However, as with all revolutionary groups in Tsarist Russia, the SRs were weakened by disagreements among themselves. Leon Trotsky, who was later to play a major role as a revolutionary, pointed to this division when he described the SRs as being made up of two competing groups: left socialist revolutionaries and the right social revolutionaries. Between 1901 and 1905, it was the terrorist faction that dominated. During those years, the SR were responsible for over 2,000 political assassinations, including Plev, the interior minister, and the Tsar's uncle, Grand Duke Sergei. The 1905 revolution, which saw the first serious open challenge to Tsardom in Nicholas II's reign, brought more gains to the liberals than to the revolutionaries. One effect of this was that more moderate right SRs gained greater influence over party policy. This began to show dividends. From 1906, the SRs experienced a growing support from the professional classes, from the trade unions, and from the All-Russian Union of Peasants, which had been set up in 1905. At its first Congress in 1906, the SR Party committed itself to revolutionary socialism and gave the special pledge to the peasants that it would end the bourgeoisie principle of private ownership by returning the land to those who worked it. It was their land policy that largely explains why the SRs remained the most popular party with the peasants. However, at the time, the Congress decisions brought disruption rather than unity. The left wing protested the party's program ignored the industrial workers, while the right asserted that Congress policy was unworkable in current Russian conditions. Chernoff tried to hold the factions together, but by 1906 onwards, the SRs were a collection of radical groups rather than a united party. Nevertheless, until they were outlawed by the Bolsheviks after the 1917 revolution, the SRs remained the party with the largest popular following in Russia. The Social Democrats, short for the All-Russian Social Democratic Workers' Party, came into being in 1898. Their aim was to achieve revolution in Russia by following the ideas of Karl Marx. Marx was a German revolutionary who advanced the idea that human society operated according to scientific principles. Just as the physical nature of the universe was governed by laws of chemistry and physics, so too the behavior of human beings was determined by social laws. These could be scientifically studied and applied. Marx claimed that the critical determinant of human behavior was class struggle, a process that operated throughout history. He referred to this process as the dialectic. For revolutionaries in the 19th century, the most exciting aspects of Marx's analysis was his conviction that the contemporary industrial era marked the final stage of the dialectical class struggle. Human history was about to reach its culmination in the revolutionary victory of the proletariat over the bourgeoisie, which would usher in the dictatorship of the proletariat. The dictatorship would be the last but one stage of history in which the workers, having overthrown the bourgeoisie in revolution and taken power, would hunt down and destroy all the surviving reactionaries. It would be a violent and bloody affair, but once these final class enemies had been obliterated, all conflict would end and the perfect, harmonious society would emerge. The attraction of Marx for Russian revolution Aries is easy to understand. His ideas had been known in Russia for some time, but what gave them particular reverence was the great spurt of the 1890s. This promised to create the individual conditions in Russia that would make a successful revolution possible. The previously unfocused hopes for revolution could now be directed on the industrial working class. The first Marxist revolutionary of note in Russia was George Plekhanov. I don't know how to say his name. Plekhanov, sometimes referred to as the father of Russian Marxism. He had translated Marx's writings into Russian and had worked to promote the idea of proletarian revolution. It was under his leadership that the SD Party was formed in 1898. Despite his pioneering work, a number of the members soon became impatient with him. They found him too theoretical in his approach. They wanted a much more active revolutionary program. The outstanding spokesman for this viewpoint was Vladimir Lenin. When Lenin returned from exile to Western Russia in 1900, he set about turning the SDs into his idea of what a true revolutionary party must be. With a colleague, Julius Martov, he founded a party newspaper, which he used as the chief means of putting his case to the party members. Lenin criticized Plekhanov for being more interested in reform than revolution. He said that under Plekhanov, the SDs, instead of transforming the workers into a revolutionary force for the overthrow of capitalism, were following a policy of economism. Economism was putting the improvement of the workers' conditions before the need for revolution. Lenin wanted living and working conditions to get worse, not better. In that way, the bitterness of the workers would increase and so drive the Russian proletariat to revolution. In 1902, Lenin wrote his strongest attack yet on Plekhanov in a pamphlet called What is to be Done? In it, he berated him for continuing to seek allies among as broad a group of anti-Tsarist elements as possible. Lenin insisted that this would lead nowhere. Revolution in Russia was possible only if it was organized and led by a party of dedicated professional revolutionaries. For Lenin, revolution was not a haphazard affair. It was a matter of applied science. The teachings of Karl Marx had already provided the key to understanding how revolutions operated. It was the task of those select members of the SD party who understood scientific Marxism to lead the way in Russia. The workers could not be left to themselves. They did not know enough. They had to be directed. It was the historical role of the uninformed members of the SD party to provide that direction. Only they could rescue the Russian ruling class and convert it to true socialism. The dispute between Lenin and Plekhanov came to a head during the Second Congress of the SD Party in 1903. Plekhanov tried to avoid confrontation, but Lenin deliberately made an issue of who had the right to belong to the Social Democratic Party. His aim was to force members to choose between Plekhanov's idea of a broad-based party open to all revolutionaries and his own concept of a small, tightly knit and exclusive party. The Congress that met in a number of different places, including Brussels and London, was a heated affair which frequently descended into a series of fights over points of procedures. A deep divide developed between Lenin and his co-editor, Julius Martov, who shared Plekhanov's viewpoint about membership. Their quarrel was as much to do with personality as with politics. Martov believed that behind Lenin's tactics was a fierce determination to become dictator of the party. In a series of votes, the SD Congress showed itself to be evenly divided between Lenin and Martov. However, after a particular set of divisions had gone in his favor, Lenin claimed that he and his supporters were the majority. This led to their being called the Bolsheviks, while Martov's group became known as the Mensheviks. Initially, the main point dividing Bolsheviks and Mensheviks was simply one of procedure. However, following the split in 1903, the differences between them hardened into a set of opposed attitudes. By 1912, the Bolsheviks and Mensheviks had become two distinct, conflicting Marxist parties. Lenin deliberately emphasized the difference between himself and Martov by resigning from the newspaper they both co-edited. The later success of Bolshevism in the October Revolution has tempted writers to overstate the importance of Lenin in the period before 1917. For example, Trotsky, who joined Lenin in 1917 after having been a Menshevik, argued in his later writings that the Bolsheviks had been systematically preparing the ground for revolution since 1903. But the fact was that during the years of 1904 to 1917, Lenin was largely absent from Russia. He lived variously in Finland, France, Switzerland, and Austria, and his visits to Russia were rare and fleeting. Although he continued from exile to issue a constant stream of instructions to his followers, he and they played only a minor role in events in Russia before 1917. Lenin and his followers in exile set up training schools for revolutionaries who were then smuggled back into Russia to infiltrate worker organizations such as the trade unions. The Bolsheviks who remained in Russia spent their time trying to raise money for the party. This frequently involved direct terrorism and violence. Post offices were favorite targets for Bolshevik attack. In one notorious episode in Georgia, a Bolshevik gang bomb blasted their way into a post office, killed some 20 people before making off with 250,000 rubles. The money stolen in such raids was used to finance the printing of mass handbills, leaflets, and newspapers attacking the Tsarist regime and calling for revolution. Yet the truth was that, despite such activities, Lenin's revolutionaries were regarded by the authorities during this period as merely a fringe group of extremists. Interestingly, the Bolsheviks were not listed by police as a major challenge to the Tsarist system. In the pre-1914 period, the numerical strength of the Bolsheviks varied between 5,000 and 10,000. Even in February 1917, it was no more than 25,000. Before 1917, the Mensheviks invariably outnumbered them. Numbers, of course, were not everything. Determination is arguably more important. Whatever the apparent lack of influence of Lenin's Bolsheviks before 1917, the fact is that when a revolutionary situation developed in 1917, it was they who proved best prepared to seize the opportunity to take over the government. The Bolsheviks' readiness was one of Lenin's major political achievements. Until the issuing of the October Manifesto in 1905, political parties had been illegal in Russia. This had not actually prevented their formation, but it made it very difficult for them to develop a genuinely democratic bodies. There was no tradition of open debate. Since they were denied legal recognition, they often resorted to extreme methods in order to spread their ideas. As a result, during the brief period of their permitted existence from 1905 to 1921, before they were again outlawed, the Russian political parties proved to be suspicious and intolerant of each other. This made cooperation and collective action difficult to organize. Yet, although they were to have a short and inglorious life, the Russian Liberal Party should not be ignored. In historical study, losers deserve as much attention as winners. The economic boom of the 1890s saw the rapid development of a small but ambitious class of industrialists, lawyers, and financiers. It was among such social groups that liberal ideas for the modernizing of Russia began to take hold. There was also often a strong national element in Russian liberalism. The national minorities viewed the liberal movement as a means of advancing their claim to be independent of Russian imperial control. Two principal parties came to prominence in the pre-1914 period, the Octobrists and the Kadets. This group dated from the issuing of the Tsar's Manifesto of October 1905, which created the Duma. The Octobrists were moderates who basically loyal to the Tsar and his government. They believed in the maintenance of the Russian Empire and regarded the manifesto and the establishment of a Duma as major constitutional advances. The Octobrists were mainly drawn from the larger commercial, industrial, and landowning interests. Their leading members were Alexander Guchkov, a factory owner, and Mikhail Rodzenko, a large landowner, both of whom were later to take a major part in the provincial government of 1917. How relatively restricted the Octobrist aims were can be gauged from their program issued in November 1905, which called for unity amongst those who sincerely want the peaceful renewal of Russia and the triumph of law and order in the country. The limited aims of the Octobrists led to their being dismissed by revolutionaries as bourgeoisie reactionaries who were unwilling to challenge the existing system. This was not wholly accurate. In the Dumas, the Octobrists frequently voiced serious criticisms of the Tsar. They may not have wanted to overthrow the Tsardom, but they were very willing to point out its failings. The Constitutional Democrats, known also as the Party of People's Freedom, also came into being as a party at the time of the 1905 revolution. The Kadets, the largest of the liberal parties, wanted Russia to develop a constitutional monarchy in which the powers of the Tsar would be restricted by a democratically elected Constituent Assembly. They believed that such a body represented the whole of Russia, would be able to settle the nation's outstanding social, political, and economic problems. Lenin dismissed this as bourgeoisie political naivety, but there is no doubt that the dream of a Constituent Assembly remained a source of excitement and inspiration to Russian reformers in the period before the 1917 revolution. The Kadets were a party of the liberal intelligentsia, containing progressive landowners, the smaller industrial entrepreneurs, and members of the professional class. Academics were prominent in the party, as typified by the cadet leader Paul Milyukov, who was a professor of history. In Duma, the Kadets proved to be the most outspoken critics of the Tsarist system. They were to play a significant role in the events surrounding the February Revolution in 1917. They wanted an all-Russian Constituent Assembly, full, equal, and civil rights for all citizens, the ending of censorship, the abolition of mortgage payments on land, the recognition of trade unions and the right to strike, and lastly, the introduction of universal free education. Lenin was radicalized at a very young age. His brother was executed for the assassination of Alexander II. And one of the things he noticed at the time was, his family were of minor aristocratic heritage. And what he mostly noticed was how everybody in his own social class, the middle class, turned on him and wouldn't help his family when his brother was convicted of the assassination. So, one of the early things that happened was he watched his brother die. And so that radicalized him. I mean, Lenin had been on the Tsarist authorities' list of dangerous persons since he was 17 years old. The execution of his elder brother in 1887 for his part in this assassination had made Lenin himself politically suspect. He lived up to his reputation. By the age of 20, his study of Marx's writing had turned him into a committed Marxist for whom revolution was a way of life. By the age of 30, his dedication to the cause of revolution in Russia had led to his arrest, imprisonment, and internal exile. Indeed, he was exiled again to Siberia when the SD Party was founded in 1898.